Caesar or not? Most of them would have said, most of the Jews would have said absolutely not. As a matter of fact, the Jews hated the idea of giving taxes to Caesar. There were three different kinds of taxes. There were the taxes that were like an income tax, 10% on everything that you got from the land. And then there was another form of tax that was 1%. And then there was the poll tax. It was simply a denarius that you had to give for every single member of your family. When Jesus and his mother, when Mary and Jesus and Joseph, Jesus of course was not yet born, made that trip from the northern part of the land of Nazareth to Bethlehem, they went to be enrolled because Rome was taking a census so that they could collect the toll or poll tax. That was the purpose of the census. And the Jews hated this because in their mind that meant that they acknowledged the government of Rome, they acknowledged the authority of Rome, and they were God's people, and they hated paying this denarius for every member of their family. What about the Herodians? Well, certainly the followers of Herod, they were in agreement that the tax should be paid. After all, Rome was doing Palestine a favor in those days, and so the tax should be paid. Now think about it. If Jesus said, yes, we should pay taxes unto Caesar, he would anger the Jews and they would have him arrested. If he were to say no, the Romans would be there to arrest him for treason and sedition. How is he going to answer? Oh, the wisdom of Jesus is overwhelming. He says, give me a coin. And then he looks at the coin and says, whose picture is on the coin? Whose likeness and inscription is this? Verse 20, as if he didn't know. They said, Caesar's. And then he gives one of the most explosive comments that has implications for church-state relationships, that shows a difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament in terms of all of these political involvements in religion. And Jesus says, all right, you render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and unto God what is God's. Wow. No wonder it says at the end of the text, they marveled at him and went away. We didn't catch him. Now look at the text. Your finger in the text, please, in verse 21. When Jesus said, render to Caesar, he uses a different word than the Pharisees used when they came to him. When they came to him in verse 17, they said, tell us, is it lawful to pay taxes? They used the word pay taxes. Jesus used an entirely different word. He didn't say, therefore pay taxes to Caesar, or pay to Caesar what is Caesar's. He said render. Apodidomai in Greek. It means to pay back. Jesus is saying you owe a debt to Caesar. It is not only legal for you to pay taxes to Caesar, but it is also morally appropriate that you do. You owe it to Caesar to pay this tax. You render unto him what is due, and then, of course, you render unto God what is due him. So what I'd like to do in the next few moments is to outline briefly what our responsibility is to the state, what our responsibility is to God, and then we're going to talk about principles that help us resolve these conflicts. That's where we're going. You remember, it's my responsibility to speak, it's your responsibility to listen, and I've been praying that we shall end at the same time. All right? First of all, what do we owe to Caesar? Well, we owe taxes. Taxes. You know, in November we have Thanksgiving, and in April we have tax-giving. And yes, my friends, so it is. We all have the responsibility to pay taxes, don't we? And even those who tend to be exempt from the state, I've been thinking about some people who live almost an independent, sheltered life. They want no subsidies from the state, but yet they have a responsibility to pay taxes. That is very, very biblical. And even when that was written in the New Testament, it was at a time when tax gatherers sometimes were quite unscrupulous. Now, there's nothing wrong with being able to use the law to your advantage, but we should be the kind of people who pay our taxes as if we are paying them to God. And of course, next time I hope you do tune in, by the way, because we're going to continue and talk about other responsibilities that we have to the state. The tension between the church and the state has always been a very one with a great deal of tension and questions. And certainly today, those kinds of questions are being asked more often than ever. But let me just simply say this to those who live in the United States, but also those of you who are listening in other countries, and we do welcome those of you from other countries, that when there becomes a conflict between the laws of the land and our allegiance to God, you remember where our allegiance always lies. We do have to obey God rather than men. And knowing when to draw the line and where to draw the line has never been easy. But if we pray and seek God, He'll give us the guidance in these decisions.
Thank you, Dr. Lutzer. Today, Dr. Erwin Lutzer introduced the last message in his series on Christians in conflict, as he spoke to us on what to do when loyalties collide. Tomorrow, more about those loyalties, and when it's appropriate to obey God rather than government. Running to Win comes to you from Chicago's Moody Church to help you understand God's roadmap for your race of life. Our 4-part series on Christians in conflict can be yours on CD, cassette, or MP3. For full information, call toll-free at 1-800-215-5001. That's 1-800-215-5001. Ask about Christians in conflict when you call. Visit our website at runningtowin.org, and don't forget, Running to Win is supported by listeners like you. This is Dave McAllister. Join us tomorrow for our next Running to Win.